The first time my parents said it out loud, I thought I had misheard them. We were sitting in the living room, the same room where I had grown up, the same couch where I used to fall asleep during late-night movies. Their friends were over for dinner, laughing, sipping tea, talking about their kids and how fast time flies. I was right there, standing near the doorway, scrolling on my phone, not hiding, not invisible. Then my mom smiled and said, almost casually, "We only have one child." Everyone nodded, someone said, "You're lucky," and the conversation moved on. My chest tightened, but no one noticed. Not even my parents. At first, I told myself it was a joke. Maybe they misspoke. Maybe they meant something else. I waited for one of them to laugh and say my name, to point at me and correct the mistake. But they didn't. They just kept talking, smiling, acting like I wasn't even in the room. I stood there frozen, feeling like the floor had shifted under my feet. I was their child too. I had lived in that house my entire life. I had shared meals, birthdays, and family photos. Yet in that moment it felt like I had been erased. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the scene over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. Had I done something wrong? Was I not enough? Or had I always been some kind of secret, something they didn't want to explain to others? Growing up, I had always felt a little different in our family, like I was on the edge of things. My sibling got most of the attention, the praise, the plans for the future. I told myself it was normal, that parents don't always treat kids equally. But hearing them say they only had one child while I was right there changed everything. The next few weeks were heavy. I started noticing things I had ignored before. Family conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Decisions made without asking me. Old photo albums where I appeared less and less as the years went on. Even relatives would sometimes ask, "So how's your brother?" and nothing more. It was like the world had quietly agreed that I didn't fully belong. I smiled through it because that's what I had learned to do. But inside, questions kept growing, louder and harder to ignore. I wanted to ask my parents directly, but fear held me back. What if they confirmed what I was already scared of? What if I wasn't supposed to exist in their story the way I thought? Instead, I listened. I paid attention. I remembered moments from my childhood that suddenly felt different. Times when teachers asked about my family and my parents gave short answers. Times when legal paperwork was signed behind closed doors. Times when my sibling was introduced proudly and I was just there. One evening, months later, it happened again. Different friends, same house, same words. "We only have one child." This time my dad said it. His voice didn't shake. He didn't look at me. I felt something break inside me, something quiet but final. That's when I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. They had decided, again and again, to leave me out of their story. I started asking myself questions I had never dared to ask before. Was I adopted? Was I the result of something they were ashamed of? Or was I simply the child who didn't fit into the life they wanted to show the world? Family secrets have a way of sitting heavy on your chest, even when no one says them out loud. And this secret felt like it had shaped my entire life without me ever knowing. As I grew older, the topic of inheritance started coming up in casual conversations around us. Friends talked about wills, properties, and what parents leave behind. I listened quietly, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and fear. If my parents told everyone they only had one child, where did that leave me? Did I even exist in their future plans? Or would I be erased there too, just like in their stories? I noticed how my parents spoke about the future with my sibling. College plans, investments, responsibilities. My name rarely came up. When it did, it was vague, like an afterthought. I tried to convince myself that material things didn't matter, that love was more important. But how do you measure love when you're not even acknowledged? One night, while helping my mom clean up after dinner, I almost asked her. The words sat on my tongue, burning. "Why do you tell people you only have one child?" But I swallowed them. She looked tired, distant, like she was carrying something heavy herself. I wondered if she knew how much those words had hurt me, or if she believed I was too young, too quiet, or too invisible to notice. The house I grew up in began to feel unfamiliar. Every room held memories but also questions. Who was I in this family? What was my role? And why did the truth feel like it was hiding just out of reach? I started doing small things on my own, looking for answers. Old documents. Conversations with relatives. Half-stories that didn't quite line up. Each clue made my heart race, but none of them gave me the full picture. What scared me the most wasn't the idea of a family secret. It was the idea that I might never hear the truth unless I went looking for it myself. And deep down, I knew that whatever the truth was, it had something to do with why my parents could look at me standing right in front of them and still say I didn't exist. The day everything finally started to make sense came when I overheard a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. My dad's voice was low, serious. Words like documents, inheritance, and it's better this way floated through the hallway. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that this wasn't just about words said to friends. It was about something much bigger, something that would change how I saw my parents, my past, and my future forever. I didn't know yet what I would inherit, or if I would inherit anything at all. But I knew one thing for sure. The story my parents told the world was not the full story. And the part they left out was me. After that phone call, I couldn't look at my parents the same way. Every normal moment felt staged, like we were all acting in a play where I didn't know my lines. At breakfast, my mom asked if I slept well. I nodded. My dad read the news like always. Everything looked normal, but my chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath all day without realizing it. I kept hearing his words in my head. Documents, inheritance, it's better this way. Better for who? I started paying closer attention to my parents' routines. I noticed how often they locked their bedroom door during the day. How certain papers were kept in a small metal box I had never seen before. How conversations suddenly shifted when I walked into a room. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. It was subtle, quiet, and that somehow made it worse. It made me feel like this secret had been part of our family for a long time, long before I was old enough to question anything. Growing up, I had always thought my childhood was normal. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had family dinners, school events, holiday photos. But now, when I look back, some memories felt edited. I remembered school forms where my parents hesitated before filling them out. Emergency contact lists where my name was written in smaller letters, almost squeezed in. Moments where teachers looked confused when both my sibling and I showed up for parent meetings. I began to wonder if other people knew. Maybe my parents' friends weren't confused when they said they had one child. Maybe they already believed it. Maybe the story had been told so many times that it became the truth for everyone except me. That thought hurt more than I expected. It made me feel like I was living a double life, known fully by no one. I tried talking to my sibling, hoping they might know something I didn't. But our relationship had always been distant, polite but careful. When I casually asked if they ever noticed how our parents talked about the family, they shrugged and said, "That's just how they are." Their tone told me not to push further. It felt like an invisible wall had been built between us, and I was standing alone on my side. At night, I lay awake thinking about identity, about what makes someone a real part of a family. Is it blood? Is it love? Is it paperwork hidden in a locked box? I remember times when I felt genuinely cared for, moments when my mom hugged me tightly or my dad helped me with homework. Those memories felt real. But then why deny me with their words? Why erase me in front of others? I started searching online, reading stories about family secrets, hidden adoptions, inheritance disputes, parents who protected one child over another. I wasn't looking for answers as much as I was looking for proof that I wasn't alone. Every story I read made my stomach twist. Some people discovered the truth too late. Some never did. And some wished they had never found out at all. One weekend, my aunt came to visit. She was my mom's older sister, the kind of person who spoke her mind but avoided emotional topics. While my parents were out shopping, she stayed back with me. We talked about small things at first, work, weather, how fast kids grow up. Then she looked at me for a long moment like she was trying to decide something. My heart started racing. I wanted her to say something, anything. But she just sighed and said, "You've grown so much." Her voice carried something else, something unspoken. I almost asked her directly. I almost said, "Do you know why my parents say they only have one child?" But fear stopped me again. What if she shut down? What if she told my parents I was asking questions? I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not yet. I needed more pieces before I faced them. Days passed, then weeks. The tension didn't fade. It grew. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, careful not to touch things, careful not to ask too much. Even simple things like family photos made me uncomfortable. I noticed how my parents displayed pictures of my sibling prominently, while mine were fewer, tucked away. When relatives came over, I watched how introductions happened. Sometimes I wasn't introduced at all. Sometimes I was introduced vaguely, without explanation. The word inheritance kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about belonging. About whether my parents saw me as someone who had a future in this family or someone who was just passing through. I wondered if there was a will already written, a plan already decided, and my name wasn't in it. One afternoon, while helping clean the storage room, I found an old box covered in dust. Inside were childhood items, school notebooks, old clothes, toys. Some were mine. Some weren't. At the bottom, I found a folder with faded edges. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents I didn't fully understand. Names, dates, signatures. Some details didn't match what I had always believed about my early years. My heart pounded so loudly I thought someone might hear it. I quickly put everything back when I heard footsteps. That moment changed something in me. It made the mystery real, solid. This wasn't just about words or feelings anymore. There was evidence. There were records. There was a truth written down somewhere, hidden but not erased. I started feeling torn between two fears. One was the fear of never knowing the truth. The other was the fear of knowing it and not being able to go back. Once you see your family differently, you can't unsee it. Once the image cracks, it never fully repairs. Sometimes I caught my parents watching me quietly, like they were measuring something. I wondered if they knew I was getting closer. If they sensed that the secret was slipping. Their kindness toward me increased in small ways, which somehow made me even more uneasy. It felt less like love and more like guilt. Every story has a moment where the past starts knocking on the present. I could feel that knock getting louder. I didn't know when it would break the door down, or who would open it first. All I knew was that my parents' story, the one they told their friends so confidently, was built on silence. And silence has a way of collapsing when you least expect it. Whatever I was about to discover wasn't just about inheritance or documents. It was about who I really was in this family. And once the truth came out, nothing would ever be simple again. The closer I got to the truth, the more isolated I felt. It was strange how a house full of people could suddenly feel so quiet. Every sound stood out, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the soft footsteps in the hallway at night. I started wondering if my parents were lying awake too, thinking about the same things I was. Or maybe they had already made peace with their choices long ago, and I was the only one still struggling. I began to notice how differently my parents spoke to me compared to my sibling. It wasn't cruel or cold, just careful. Like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. My mom would ask about my day but never follow up. My dad would give advice but keep it general, distant. With my sibling, conversations were detailed and future-focused. Plans, expectations, responsibilities. With me, everything stayed in the present, like my future wasn't something they wanted to think about too deeply. At work and school I started drifting. Friends noticed I was quieter than usual. When they asked what was wrong, I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that your parents act like you don't exist when it matters most? That your entire sense of family feels unstable? So I smiled and said I was just tired. That became my answer for everything. One evening, I overheard my parents arguing in low voices. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls were thin and my name slipped through the cracks. My mom sounded anxious, saying things like, "They're getting older, and we can't keep avoiding this forever." My dad responded with frustration, repeating that, "It's already decided, and this is the safest option." I stood there, frozen, heart racing. Decided by who? Safe for who? That night, I wrote down everything I knew. Every strange memory. Every moment that didn't make sense. I needed to see it all laid out to understand the pattern. The more I wrote, the clearer it became that this wasn't a sudden choice my parents made recently. This had been planned, managed, controlled for years. My existence fit into their lives, but only within strict limits. I started thinking about legal things I had never cared about before. Wills. Guardianship. Family rights. Inheritance laws. I hated that my mind went there, but I couldn't help it. If my parents didn't publicly acknowledge me, where did that leave me legally? Emotionally, I already felt invisible. I didn't want to be erased on paper too. I tried talking to a distant cousin I trusted, someone who had always been kind to me. I didn't ask directly, but I hinted. I mentioned how my parents told people they only had one child. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Just a second too long. Then they laughed it off and said parents say weird things sometimes. But their voice had changed. That pause told me everything. People knew more than they were saying. That realization hurt deeply. It meant the secret wasn't just between my parents. It meant multiple adults had chosen silence over honesty, comfort over truth. I wondered how many family gatherings had included conversations about me that I was never meant to hear. How many decisions were made with the assumption that I would just accept whatever role I was given. My relationship with my sibling grew even more complicated. I caught them watching me sometimes like they wanted to say something but didn't know how. Once I asked them if they ever worried about the future, about what would happen to the family someday. They shrugged and said our parents had everything handled. Their confidence made me feel smaller, like an outsider listening to plans that didn't include me. I started questioning my own memories. Was I loved, or was I simply cared for out of obligation? Were those hugs real, or were they part of maintaining an image inside the house, even if the outside world saw a different story? These questions messed with my head more than I expected. Some days I felt angry. Other days deeply sad. And sometimes I felt numb, like my emotions were shutting down to protect me. The metal box my parents kept locked became an obsession. I didn't want to steal or break into it, but knowing it existed felt heavy. It symbolized everything I wasn't allowed to know. Every time my dad moved it or my mom checked the lock, my heart raced. I imagined my name inside, written in a way that didn't match my birth certificate. Or maybe not written at all. One weekend, my parents attended a family event without me. They said it was easier that way. That sentence stayed with me. Easier for them maybe. But it confirmed what I had been fearing. My presence complicated things. I asked myself why. What about me made their story harder to tell? I began wondering if my parents thought they were protecting me. Maybe they believed this lie would spare me pain or conflict. But the silence was already hurting me. Not knowing was shaping my identity in ways they couldn't see. I wasn't just confused about inheritance or family roles. I was confused about myself. Late one night, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to see myself the way they might. Was I a reminder of something they wanted to forget? A compromise they had made? Or a responsibility they never planned for? The answers didn't come, but the questions grew heavier. The tension in the house reached a point where even small interactions felt loaded. A simple, "How was your day?" sounded like a test. A casual comment about the future felt like a warning. I could sense something approaching, like a storm building slowly, quietly. I didn't know when the truth would finally come out or who would break first, me or my parents. All I knew was that the story they told the world was incomplete. And the longer it stayed that way, the more damage it caused. Whatever was hidden in those documents, whatever decision had been made about inheritance and identity, it was shaping all of us. The mystery wasn't just about being acknowledged. It was about being chosen. And until that choice was spoken out loud, the silence would keep growing, pressing in on all of us, waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained. The tension reached a point where it was impossible to pretend everything was normal. Even silence felt loud. Every look my parents exchanged carried weight, like they were communicating in a language I wasn't meant to understand. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, unsure whether to step forward or run away. My life inside that house had turned into a waiting game, and I didn't know what I was waiting for anymore. One afternoon, my parents asked me to sit down with them. Just the three of us. No phones, no distractions. My heart started pounding before they even spoke. My mom's hands were folded tightly in her lap. My dad cleared his throat more than once, like he was buying time. They said they wanted to talk about the future. That word again. The future. It hovered in the air, heavy and loaded. They spoke carefully, choosing each word like it might break something if handled the wrong way. They talked about responsibilities, about planning ahead, about how families change over time. But they never said the things I needed to hear. They never explained why I was erased from their stories. They never acknowledged the lie. It felt like they were circling the truth, hoping it would disappear if they avoided it long enough. I wanted to interrupt them, to ask direct questions, to demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe fear. Maybe the realization that once I spoke, there would be no going back. This conversation felt like the edge of a cliff, and I didn't know if I was ready to jump. After that talk, the house felt even heavier. My parents became unusually attentive, checking in on me more often, offering help I hadn't asked for. It felt less like care and more like preparation, like they were bracing for something. I started wondering if they were planning to tell me the truth, or if they were preparing for me to find out on my own. A few days later, I overheard another phone call. This time, my mom sounded emotional. She mentioned my name clearly, without hesitation. Hearing it used in that serious tone sent chills through me. She talked about timing and how much they should know. My dad responded quietly but firmly, reminding her of an agreement they had made years ago. An agreement. That word echoed in my head long after the call ended. I couldn't stop thinking about that agreement. Who made it? When? And why did it involve me without my consent? The idea that my life had been shaped by a decision made behind closed doors made me feel powerless. Yet at the same time, it lit something inside me. A need to reclaim my story. I started preparing myself emotionally, imagining different truths I might hear. Maybe I wasn't legally theirs. Maybe my inheritance had conditions attached. Maybe acknowledging me publicly would disrupt something bigger than I understood. Each possibility scared me in a different way, but none of them felt as painful as the silence. The breaking point came when my parents' friends visited again. I wasn't supposed to be home, but my plans changed. I stood in the hallway, listening as familiar laughter filled the living room. My heart raced as the conversation turned to family, children, and legacy. I waited, breath held, hoping, almost desperately, that this time would be different. Then my dad said it again. Calmly. Clearly. We only have one child. Something inside me snapped, not in anger but in clarity. I realized I couldn't keep living in the shadows of someone else's version of the truth. The lie wasn't just hurting me anymore, it was shaping my future in ways I didn't agree to. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave forever but to give myself space. I needed to breathe, to think, to decide what I was willing to accept. As I zipped the bag closed, my mom stood in the doorway watching me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, it felt like everything was about to spill out. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something important. But no words came. I walked out of the house with more questions than answers, but also with a growing sense of determination. Whatever the truth was, I was getting close. I could feel it. The lies were thinning, the silence cracking. Something was about to give. I didn't know if the truth would bring relief or more pain. I didn't know what it would mean for inheritance, for family ties, or for my place in their lives. But I knew one thing for sure, the moment of confrontation was coming. And when it did, everything we had avoided for years would finally have to be faced. I stayed with a friend that night, but sleep never really came. My mind kept replaying everything, the words my parents used, the looks they avoided, the way my mom froze in the doorway. By morning, my phone was full of missed calls and unread messages from home. None of them explained anything. They were all the same: please come back, we need to talk, you're worrying us. That worried me even more. If this was just a misunderstanding, why did it feel so urgent? When I finally returned home, the atmosphere had completely changed. The house felt tense, like everyone was holding something back. My parents were overly polite, almost formal, as if we were strangers trying not to offend each other. My sibling was unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact. Something had shifted while I was gone, and I could feel it in my bones. That evening, I overheard my sibling arguing with my parents. This time they weren't whispering. My sibling sounded upset, confused, asking questions I had never heard them ask before. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" they said. "Do you know how this looks?" My heart sank. That was the moment I realized the secret wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever my parents had been hiding had finally reached the one person they had always been honest with. Later that night, my sibling came to my room. They sat on the edge of my bed, silent for a long time. When they finally spoke, their voice was shaky. They said they had found something while looking for old documents, papers that didn't line up with what they had always believed. They didn't explain what exactly they saw, but their expression told me it was serious. This wasn't a small misunderstanding. This was something that could change how both of us saw our parents. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my confusion. That brought a strange sense of relief mixed with fear. If my sibling was questioning things too, it meant the story my parents had carefully built was starting to collapse from the inside. And if that happened, there would be consequences none of us could control. The next day, my parents announced that a lawyer would be visiting soon to update some paperwork. They said it casually, like it was no big deal. But the word lawyer sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about feelings anymore. This was about legal identity, inheritance, and decisions that could shape our futures permanently. I wondered if they planned to finalize something before the truth fully came out. I started thinking about what I actually knew about myself. My birth records. My last name. The stories I had been told growing up. I realized how much of my identity was based on trust. Trust in my parents. Trust in what they chose to share. And now that trust was cracking. My mom tried to talk to me privately later that day. She said things like, "We did what we thought was best, and not everything is as simple as it seems." Her eyes filled with tears, but she still avoided the real explanation. I asked her directly if there was something about my past I didn't know. She didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. As the days passed, I noticed extended family members acting differently around me. Messages became shorter. Invitations stopped coming. It felt like news was spreading quietly without anyone telling me what that news actually was. Being left out of the conversation about your own life is a special kind of pain. The lawyer's visit loomed over all of us like a deadline. I couldn't shake the feeling that once those papers were signed, something would be set in stone. Something I wouldn't be able to undo. I began to wonder if my parents were rushing to protect one child's future at the cost of another's. One night, my sibling finally told me more. They said the documents they saw suggested that my connection to the family was more complicated than I had ever been told. They didn't go into details, saying they weren't sure what was true yet. But their words confirmed my worst fear. My place in the family had always come with conditions. That realization raised the stakes in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about being acknowledged. It was about whether I truly belonged, legally and emotionally. Whether my future would be decided without my voice, just like my past had been. The closer we got to the lawyer's visit, the more urgent everything felt. Conversations became sharper. Silences became heavier. I could sense that a confrontation was inevitable, and when it happened, it wouldn't be gentle. I didn't know what the final truth would be. I didn't know who would be hurt the most when it came out. But I knew this. The story my parents had been telling for years was about to face reality. And when it did, there would be no way to hide behind the words, "We only have one child," ever again. The day the lawyer arrived, the house felt smaller than ever. We all sat around the dining table, hands folded, eyes avoiding each other. The lawyer placed a thin stack of documents in front of my parents and spoke calmly, like this was just another routine meeting. But nothing about it felt routine to me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My parents finally stopped circling the truth. My dad took a deep breath and said my name in a way he never had before, slow, careful, heavy with meaning. He admitted that the story they told the world was incomplete. Years ago, when I was very young, a decision had been made to protect the family's reputation and avoid legal complications. I wasn't a secret child in the way I had feared, but my place in the family had been redefined. They explained that I was legally theirs, raised by them, loved by them, but my birth circumstances had created complications they didn't know how to handle. Instead of facing them, they chose silence. They chose to present a simpler version of their family to the outside world. One child, one story, one future they could control. Hearing it out loud was overwhelming. I felt anger, relief, sadness all at once. Years of confusion suddenly had a shape. It didn't erase the pain, but it explained it. The reason I was excluded from conversations about inheritance wasn't because they didn't care. It was because they were afraid. Afraid of questions. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of losing what they had built. The lawyer confirmed what mattered most to me in that moment. Legally, I was entitled to the same inheritance as my sibling. My parents had never removed me from any official documents. The lie was social, not legal. That truth hit me harder than anything else. They had protected my rights on paper while denying my existence in words. My sibling looked stunned. They admitted they had always felt pressure to carry the family name alone, to be everything our parents expected. They never realized that pressure came at my expense. In that moment, something between us shifted. Not fully healed, but understood. My mom cried openly then. She said she knew their choices had hurt me, even if she didn't fully understand how deep the wound was. She said every time they claimed they had only one child, it felt like losing me a little more, but she didn't know how to stop once the lie became routine. Silence had felt easier than correction. I told them how invisible I had felt. How words spoken casually had shaped my entire sense of belonging. How inheritance was never just about money, but about being counted. Being seen. Being chosen. The room was quiet when I finished. No one tried to defend themselves anymore. For the first time we talked honestly. About fear. About control. About how protecting an image can cost you real connection. The main conflict that had haunted our family for years finally had a name, and once named, it began to lose its power. The lawyer gathered the documents, saying no changes were needed unless my parents wanted them. That should have been the end of it. Closure. Resolution. But just as the meeting was wrapping up, the lawyer paused and looked at me again. There was one more document, they said. Something my parents had asked them to prepare quietly, just in case. My parents exchanged a look I hadn't seen before, surprise mixed with resignation. The lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the table toward me. Inside was a letter. Written years ago. Addressed to me. My hand shook as I read it. It was written by my parents, but for a version of me they never expected to face the truth so directly. In it, they explained something they had never said out loud, that the decision to present only one child to the world wasn't just about fear or reputation. It was about control over the future. They believed that by limiting the story of the family, they could limit conflict later, especially around inheritance, expectations, and responsibility. But what shocked me most was the final line. They admitted that the real reason they were so careful wasn't because they doubted me. It was because they knew I was stronger than they were. They feared that if I ever fully understood my place, I would question everything. And they were right. The room felt suspended in time. The main conflict was resolved. I was acknowledged, legally protected, finally told the truth. But that final twist changed everything. It reframed the past not as rejection, but as fear of my independence. I folded the letter slowly and looked at my parents. I told them I accepted the truth, but acceptance didn't mean forgetting. Healing would take time. Trust would have to be rebuilt. As I stood up from the table, I realized something else. My inheritance wasn't just shared property or future assets. It was clarity. It was my voice. It was the power to tell my own story from now on. And as I walked away, I knew the biggest surprise wasn't what they had hidden from me, it was what I was finally free to claim. After the lawyer left and the house finally fell quiet, we all sat there for a long time, unsure of what to say next. The truth had been spoken, but speaking it didn't magically fix everything. It just changed the shape of the silence. This time, though, the silence felt honest. Heavy, yes, but no longer built on lies. In the days that followed, life moved slowly, like we were all learning how to walk again. My parents didn't suddenly become perfect, and I didn't suddenly feel healed. But something important had shifted. They stopped correcting people when I introduced myself. They stopped using vague words about the family. Small changes, but real ones. For the first time, I felt like I was being seen, not hidden. My relationship with my sibling changed too. It wasn't dramatic or emotional at first. We talked more carefully, like two people meeting again after years apart. They admitted they had always felt pressure to be the only one, the sole carrier of expectations, inheritance, and responsibility. Hearing that helped me understand that while I had felt invisible, they had felt trapped. We had both been shaped by the same secret in different ways. One evening we sat together going through old photo albums. This time we didn't skip over the awkward pages. We talked about the memories behind the photos, what we remembered differently, what we wished had been said back then. It wasn't about rewriting the past, but about finally acknowledging it. My parents started having difficult conversations too. Not just with me but with extended family. I wasn't present for most of them, but I could feel the impact. The tension in the air eased. Family calls became less formal. Invitations came again. It was clear that telling the truth, even late, was lighter than carrying the lie. The question of inheritance, which had once felt like a symbol of rejection, slowly lost its power over me. Knowing my name was there legally mattered, but what mattered more was understanding why it had ever felt uncertain. Inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about recognition. About being included in the future, not just the past. I had one last conversation with my parents that truly closed the chapter. I asked them why they never trusted me with the truth earlier. My dad admitted they underestimated me. They thought shielding me would protect me. Instead, it left me questioning my worth. My mom said she regretted every moment she stayed silent when she should have spoken up. I told them something important too. That while their fear had shaped my childhood, it wouldn't define my adulthood. That I wasn't angry anymore, but I wouldn't pretend the pain never existed. Healing, I said, doesn't mean erasing scars. It means learning how to live with them. Over time, the house began to feel like home again. Not the same home as before, but a more honest one. Conversations felt lighter. Laughter sounded real. Even disagreements felt healthier because at least they were out in the open. I realized something else during this journey. Families aren't just broken by secrets. They're broken by the belief that silence is safer than truth. My parents had thought they were protecting everyone. In reality, they were teaching us how to hide from ourselves. Looking back, I don't see my story as one of inheritance disputes or family lies alone. I see it as a story about identity. About what happens when someone grows up questioning whether they belong. About how damaging it can be when your existence is quietly denied, even without cruelty. If there's one takeaway from everything I went through, it's this: words matter. The stories families tell the world eventually shape the stories their children tell themselves. Saying "we only have one child" might have sounded harmless to my parents, but it echoed in my mind for years. Today, when people ask about my family, I answer confidently. I don't wait for permission anymore. I don't shrink to fit someone else's version of the truth. I say who I am and where I come from without fear. My parents are still learning too. We all are. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. But honesty gives it a place to start. And for the first time in my life, I feel like my place in this family is no longer something that can be taken away with a sentence. The story that once hurt me has become the story that freed me. And that, more than any inheritance, is what I carry forward.